City of Stevens Point Redevelopment Authority meeting, recorded Tuesday, May 14, 2019.
Five, financial reports, claims, and statements from prior months. Comments, Director?
Those are in your packet. Nothing out of the ordinary except for the period in January. You'll see the $5,500 and then $1,000 deposit that related to the 101 Georgia Street property acquisition by Habitat.
Motion to accept.
I move that we accept the reports and place them on file.
Commissioner Temeter,
Second.
second by Commissioner Phillips. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Number 6, acknowledgement of the Plan Commission's recommendation of May 4th, 2019 relating to the request from the Redevelopment Authority of the City of Stevens Point to purchase and sell, transfer, and/or dispose of 5 properties: 1909 Prairie Street, 1525 Ellis Street, 1700 Strongs Avenue, 1708 Elk Street, and 1100 4th Avenue. Director.
So these properties are currently owned by Skip Myers. These are 5 properties that have been also subject to potential tax deed through the county. Since then, the county has decided to take 3 of these properties. One is 1909 Prairie Street, 1525 Ellis Street, as well as 1708 Elk Street. And the reason why I brought these in front of you is these are potential redevelopment options for the Redevelopment Authority to consider. Some unique situations with these properties. They have gone through the foreclosure process, and the bank has been awarded the foreclosure of these 5 properties. However, the bank has decided not to exercise that foreclosure, so they kind of sit here as like a zombie foreclosure unless something can be done with the properties. We have reached out to the bank for potential negotiation of a sale or transfer of them. It doesn't seem likely that this will happen. So the 3 that are going to tax deed, the 1909 Prairie, 1525 Elk, 1708 or 1525 Ellis, and 1708 Elk Street, at least should have some resolution as we go through the tax deed process, and we can kind of discuss those getting into items number 7 and 8, because 6, 7, and 8 kind of all run together. The 2 other properties, looking at 1100 4th Avenue, our neighborhood improvement coordinator has been in all of these properties. 1909 seems salvageable and probably will sell through the tax deed process. So the way that the tax deed process works is if the county takes them and then they put them on the tax deed sale, they have to try to get the appraised value of those properties for the first time as people bid on those. If they do not receive that appraised value or market value, they can then put them back out to bid and accept an offer that they so choose that they feel is most beneficial. But the first time they have to go out, they have to get that appraised value. 1909 Prairie will likely have some action, just given the shape of the property. 1525 Ellis and then 1708 Elk would like to have further conversation about a potential agreement with Cap Services that if these properties don't sell for the appraised value, that maybe we can work out some sort of deal with the county to acquire them and then work with Cap Services to get them renovated and then back into the hands of a low to moderate income family and get them rehabbed. But the other 2, 1100 4th, it's probably a candidate for a raise order, and we've started that process to issue a raise order on that property to get that raise. So hopefully that will have some resolution with that. But the other challenging property is the 1700 Strongs, and this relates to the church on Strongs. The situation here is that the foreclosure judgment has been awarded on the church, however, not on the adjacent parking lot that serves the church. So they're 2 separate parcels, which complicates things a little bit. And the county has decided not to pursue taking the church property. They are behind, both of those properties are behind on the taxes, and it would make it a lot easier if the county would proceed with tax deed on those properties, because then it would wipe out the lien on the bank the bank loan on the property, but they've decided to pass on that right now. I know the city attorney was going to join us today, but we might have a couple other options that we can proceed under law with trying to force a sale of 1,700 Strongs, given its status of abandonment. And there's Logan. Logan, I'm just discussing the church and kind of status of abandonment. But there might be other avenues under the law that would force a sale that would allow us to at least try to get these properties rehabbed or in the hands of someone else who would take over ownership of them, so we can get them back. I mean, as we had discussed before, looking at different programs for the redevelopment authority and, trying to get rid of the worst house on the block type program, some of these are starting to fit into that category where they are starting to bring down the value of the surrounding properties. So what the Plan Commission did is they they acted on in order for us to acquire properties, the Plan Commission needs to provide a recommendation. They've done that. They've recommended that the RA can proceed with the acquisition and disposition of these 5 properties. Doesn't mean the RA has to take any of them, but they've at least provided that recommendation to move forward. So item number 6 would just be acknowledging their recommendation. Item 7 would be the potential to proceed with any sort of acquisition of any one of these properties. And then item number 8 would be further conversations about a potential agreement with CAP Services on 1525 Ellis and 1708 Elk Street.
So what type of motion do you want on 6?
Just the acknowledgement of the Plan Commission's actions or recommendation.
So moved. Mike? Second. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, aye? Aye. Motion carries. Number 7, purchase and sell, transfer, or dispose of 5 properties, 1909 Prairie Street, 1525 Ellis Street, 1700 Strongs Avenue, 1708 Elk Street, and 1100 4th Avenue. Director.
So Logan, would you want to give maybe just a quick comment regarding the potential process for us to, if we would go look at the church property, because that seems to be the one that is outstanding within these 5 on a process that we could take to possibly gain control or have someone else gain control of the property?
Sure. So you've got a situation with these, which is referred to normally as zombie foreclosures. So that means you have a mortgagee who foreclosed on the property, they got their judgment, and then they haven't done anything with it. And your guess is as good as mine as to why they haven't done anything, i.e. they haven't put it up to sheriff's sale or anything like that. My guess would be maybe funny business with the balance sheet. Here's what we can value this asset at, but if you put it up for sheriff's sale, well, then you got to look reality in the mirror and say what you actually got for it. I can't say for certain. I'm not a banker, but a lot of communities have dealt with these where these properties essentially just sit abandoned. And when you start looking at doing enforcement of property maintenance codes, the owner of record is still the person who was foreclosed on. Nobody else is, they have the bank has their judgment, but the ownership of the property hasn't transferred. So there's a provision in the statutes that allows for the municipality in which the property is located to petition the court as part of the foreclosure case, even though, these cases are essentially closed, but there's still a case number there. We can petition the court and say, this property's been abandoned by the mortgagor, i.e. the person who was foreclosed upon. And we can request that the court order the sheriff's sale to occur. And then there's some things that you'd have to be able to demonstrate. The court can either just sign the order on its own findings based upon whatever evidence it already has in its possession in connection with the case, or it can set it for a hearing at which representatives of the municipality would be allowed, have a right essentially to testify as to evidence of abandonment. So that evidence could be things like the utilities have been shut off, nobody's living there, things like nuisance activities occurring there, request for police response, it's been broken into, the windows are boarded up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or, for instance, the non-appearance of the mortgagor. The person who's foreclosed upon might get a notice saying, oh, the city filed something, and I got foreclosed on this years ago, I don't care about this. They don't show up. Their failure to appear at that hearing is also evidence that it's been abandoned. So a little technical, but long story short, there's an ability for us as a municipality to force the sheriff's sale to happen, so that instead of some bank who doesn't care about the property, doesn't want to do anything with it, owning it, you have somebody who just ponied up some cash for it and presumably wants to rehab it, do something with it.
Questions for Logan?
If we went through that process, I assume the back taxes are still due?
That's correct. Michael and I were just talking about that earlier today. So it's a mortgage foreclosure. It's not a tax foreclosure. So those back taxes would still exist, would still be owing. And, presumably a buyer is going to be aware of what that amount is. They're going to make a bid at the sheriff's sale that takes that into account.
And if the mortgagor showed up, they would be putting a price on it. Was what the debt still remaining on that property? Is that typically what happens?
They certainly could. The mortgagor could take whatever action with regard to the sheriff's sale that they normally would take. A lot of times you see a mortgagor will bid whatever their outstanding balance is. And if somebody outbids them, gravy, wonderful. They also can try to contest the action that the city's taking to compel it. They have an ability to come in and make arguments as to the statutory elements that have to be found in order for the court to make the order. But usually the writing's on the wall fairly well. If there's any genuine material issue of fact there, it's probably not at a stage where you'd be really taking the step to try to compel that. So I think that we'd be in pretty sound footing if we were going to do this.
One of my concerns about some of these properties is you might get other people who have less than, don't have enough money to fix it up the way we'd like to see it fixed up.
Mm-hmm.
So my concern was it'd be great if we could get our hands, that we, the city RDA, could get the hands on it, as opposed to somebody who's just gonna change the locks on the door and rent it as is. So my question is, how can we get our hands on it? You've already said you've explored that with the bank, and the bank's not willing to transfer the title to us. The tax deed is a way of doing it, but that's gonna be, what would you estimate, 12 to 18 months before that happens?
I don't think it would be that long for a tax deed process.
Could be a long
I
time.
mean, the county's got a lot of properties that they're exploring right now, I think.
Yeah.
They're exploring 40 potential properties throughout the county.
And in fact, you've said some of, they're not even gonna explore some of these.
Right,
that are
some
on
of them
this
they're not
list.
taking.
They're not even gonna take that. So my question is there a possibility that the current owner of record could transfer the property to us? And has that been explored? And obviously, we don't want to assume the debt that person has on these properties. It'd have to be sort of a handshake with the bank as well, but is that a possibility, and can that be explored?
No. So, I mean, the degree to which the, Mr. Myers in this case, or anybody else would be involved is relatively minor. Essentially, his rights to direct transference of the property have been extinguished via the judgment. So even though the bank has not proceeded to carry out their right to sell it under the judgment, they have taken essentially legal possession of the property via the rights conferred to them under that judgment. So the current owner would be prohibited under the judgment, I believe, from
Okay.
transferring it. However, certainly are there mechanisms to acquire it. I don't think the bank has any opposition to the city just, buying out their judgment for whatever amount that they feel would be fit for that. I'm not sure exactly what they would take. I mean, that would just be a negotiated.
$1 and other valuables, since that's what they're gonna get out of it anyway. I mean, that would be, my assumption is if it goes to tax deed, they'll get nothing. Is that correct?
Well, it would depend on what somebody would buy it for and whether that amount would cover the back taxes and have enough left over to give them a reasonable chunk.
So if it sells for more than the taxes that are owed, then the balance does go to the bank, not to the county.
Right.
Ah,
At least that's my understanding of it. I
So-
haven't had reason to
yeah.
scour the tax foreclosure statutes in a while.
That's interesting, though, because that means the county has no interest in other than maybe the legal obligation to sell it for appraised value, they really have no financial interest or incentive to sell it for more than they can get. I mean, there's no incentive to sell it for as much as they can.
Yeah, my understanding is it's, in a lot of ways similar to just regular old mortgage foreclosure. If there's a surplus there, when we have our housing rehab loans that we've, got a bunch of them out there, if those go into foreclosure, or if the properties that those are applied to go into foreclosure on a primary mortgage, we always just file a notice of retainer or demand for surplus and cross our fingers that it sells for a high enough price that we're able to get made at least partially whole on our loans. I think when the county sells something for under tax foreclosure, it essentially operates the same way.
Well, Mr. Chairman, my point would be that some of these, if the county's not going to go after them for back taxes, and it's a zombie in terms of foreclosure, it's going to sit there empty, and we haven't accomplished what we wanted to accomplish. And so I'm trying to explore other mechanisms to try to accelerate this process such that we don't have come back here 1-2 years from now and looking at the same empty properties.
And I think what you were saying about, trying to get it not just into the hands of somebody who wants to do some work on it, but the right person,
Right.
An RFP type process for that is usually going to be the most effective. You publicize it, get a number of people who are interested, see what types of resources they have, what sort of intent they have with it. You certainly can get the situation where somebody combs the foreclosure sales and buys things and puts the absolute minimum into them, and then tries to rent them out. I mean, you've seen, if you follow any of the landlord wars down in Milwaukee, those have been some entertaining tales. You did end up having some courts order receivership by the city for a lot of properties, and also prohibit a couple of the worst landlords from bidding on any future sheriff sales in the county, which is kind of an extraordinary achievement by the city attorney's office down there. But I think if there are resources available for this body to acquire properties, and a willingness to do so, then certainly you can be the ones in charge of who it ends up being transferred to.
Well, my question would be, can we make an agreement with the county that if they foreclose, we'll buy it back at X? That give them an incentive to unload it and get it developed?
My guess would be that it's unlawful for them to preclude other buyers, because they'd have to sell it through an auction process, a sheriff sale. But we can certainly make a commitment to the county that should they choose to go down that road and bring it to tax sale, that we stand ready to make a bid of at least X.
And one of their concerns is they don't want to get stuck maintaining the property and tearing it down.
Right.
So if they have a willing partner, I think there's interest in doing so. I think the situation with these properties at hand, there wasn't a lot of time to discuss that with them and get a process in place. I think next year they probably would move forward with taking some of these where we can have further conversations. But trying to deal with these properties sooner, because the church windows are open and water's getting in, and it degrades every day that it still stands there unmaintained. So getting these properties taken care of sooner is going to be more beneficial with this process. Just looking quickly at kind of some background, I'm not sure if this will relate to Wisconsin and Portage County, but they talk about that excess amount above the amount that the county needs to give for taxes, that excess, that surplus. Sometimes that goes back to the owner of the property, which in this case would still be Skip.
Top of the head thinking here, what's the chances of the city and/or the RDA acquiring the property through condemnation? The ones that the county don't plan to take on back taxes. So we'll start with those.
Well, when you're talking about, a Chapter 32 condemnation, you're really only able to do that for certain purposes.
Light elimination?
Roads.
Light elimination?
I don't believe that's among them. I think then you're looking at 66-1105 for, your standard, blighted area law. But in terms of forcing it's one thing for you to use a portions of Chapter 66 for redevelopment to acquire properties that are blighted in an arm's length transaction, or even a distressed sale of some sort, like certainly this would be. But to say, you're going to sell this to the city, and I have a court that's willing to back up our right to do it, and you don't have a choice in the matter, that's, Chapter 32. And, that's used for roadways, public facilities, utilities, that kind of stuff. There is, sort of the first step in the process of somebody who would want to challenge an action like that would be for them to argue to a court that there's no legal right for the property to be taken in that manner. And I think just saying, well, this is blighted and we'd like to see it redeveloped. You get into some of the finer points of things like, the Kelo New London decision from the Supreme Court years back, where the, government taking of private property in order to be handed over to another private user for redevelopment. Now, granted, that was writ large compared to something like this, but I think that's probably not the right road to go down, especially since there are so many mechanisms for a property owner to increase the level of compensation way beyond fair market value, because it's, understandably, those mechanisms are tailored with a really robust amount of due process for the property owner. You're using the mechanisms of government to take somebody's private property. So it needs to be something where the geographic location of it is absolutely essential, where you cannot substitute some other piece of property for this project. And when you're talking about a road, well, it's kind of written on its face that, this is where the road is, or this is where it absolutely needs to be. I don't think that, kind of being wordy about it, no, I don't think that's a great idea.
Anything else?
What I would say is that specifically with regards to the church, if what we're concerned most about in terms of some of these timetable issues, particularly this sort of slowness of the tax deed process, I don't think that either Mr. Myers nor the bank would have any opposition to the city going in and buttoning it up a bit. And if it's just a matter of getting some plywood over the openings in the building, I think we could certainly get their permission to go in and do that, and I can't imagine it would cost very much either, so it might be a good step to take.
Which brings up the issue of orders. I would hope that all of these properties would have, the buyers of all of these properties would have a clear understanding of what the city's expectations are in terms of fixing them up to livable standards. And so I don't know if the orders have been issued or been compiled, but I would hope that.
So we were able to tour the properties
All of them.
recently, so those orders are being written, if
Good.
not already issued.
Good, because that hopefully then will give some sort of expectation, anybody who's interested in buying it and rehabbing it, what the minimum expectation would be, getting back to what the expectations of the community are.
So as we go through these 5 properties, I think the one that sticks out in trying to find some avenue to take in order to try to gain control or redevelopment of the property is 1700 Strong as a church. The other ones seem to have some sort of resolution with the county taking at least 3 of them, and then 1100 Fourth likely going to be raised and through that process to address that structure. As we go through the next item 7, or with 7 and 8 here, the 2 in question with CAP services, and maybe actually Jim on our committee can also kind of walk through this as well, but the 2 that we're looking at there are 1525 Ellis Street and 1708 Elk Street. 1525 Ellis has a leaky roof, so we need to address this soon, otherwise the situation gets worse. 1708 Elk Street, the challenge with that one is that it's been converted to a duplex, and converting it back to a standard single-family property is a little bit more expensive. So, what I'm thinking is as we work through potential agreement with CAP Services, and kind of Jim can maybe outline the program that they're looking at using, that we make an agreement with CAP that we put in a bid for these properties for the amount that CAP is willing to acquire them for. And then that would be our agreement, and we kind of serve as an intermediary to gain control of the property and then transferring them to CAP. So maybe If you don't mind, Mr. Chairperson, to have Jim explain the program that they'd be looking at using.
So I'm James Barrett from CAP Services, Assistant Director of Housing. So Michael and I have worked on other projects together for CAP and the city, and the funding source that we would probably be using on these projects is a grant that we wrote to the federal government. Neighborhood Stabilization Program is what it's called. It's to buy foreclosed, blighted properties, rehab them, which is bring them up to minimum HUD code, and then sell them to income qualified buyers to strengthen the neighborhoods. And it's a kind of a fix up the worst house in the neighborhood, and hopefully other homeowners will follow and start taking some pride in their property, fixing things up. There are fewer regulations, strangely enough, hard enough to believe as that is, with this neighborhood stabilization program. They allow us to do a lot more with the money. It's not quite as restrictive as some of the other funding sources that we use on a day-to-day basis with owner-occupied buildings. So it's kind of nice. We can make these projects turn out pretty sharp. So that would probably be the main source of funding. We could also augment that with some other CAP services funding that we have. Timeline for one of these things, because there wouldn't be a homeowner involved, things can move along a lot more quickly because we don't have all these qualifying events that have to happen with the owner. We get to make the decisions, so that's faster. And the contractors that would bid on this project, they know that they can stay on site. They don't have to worry about making a mess for the homeowners and cleaning up every night. So things move along a lot more rapidly with these types of projects. So, does anybody have any questions?
Question for Jim.
What's the timeline, you think, on these? If we acquired all three of them, is it this year's project, is it next year's project?
What we were thinking about, Michael and I have talked about, Mark Cordes and I have talked about, is the fact that because we do have two NSP projects in the works right now, this would probably be a next year project. But in the meantime, the letter that's included in the packet kind of explained that if CAP took possession of these buildings, that we would be responsible for the maintenance, so the city wouldn't get saddled with worrying about the roof caving in or broken windows and whatnot. In exchange for that, though, CAP would need to know that we wouldn't get a call from the inspection department saying, get it done next week.
We wouldn't do that. There's only two of the properties listed there, John, rather than all three.
Yeah.
On number 8.
So those are the 1525 Ellis and 1708 Elk.
All right. So what type of motion would you like?
So what I'm thinking for item 7, we'll explore some opportunities for 1700 Strongs. In 1100 Fourth Avenue, hopefully we can deal with. In 1909 Prairie probably has a pretty good shot at selling with the tax foreclosure or tax deed process. But I guess the action I'd be looking for is authorizing the chairperson and myself to put in a bid for 1525 Ellis and 1708 Elk. For the amount that CAP is willing to pay for these properties. And then we'd also have that agreement then to work out with CAP Services under item number 8 to have that agreement in place for those two related properties. I don't have a dollar amount because they go to bid, so I mean, I can't, it's not like they're on the open market for sale, so it'd be a bid process that we throw in.
Committee?
I'll make a motion that we move that we authorize the chairperson and the executive director to put in a bid for 1525 Ellis Street and 1708 Elk Street with Portage County in an amount not to exceed the amount CAP Services is willing to pay for such properties.
Is there a second? Jim, I'd recommend that you do not vote on this.
I'm going to abstain from voting.
I'll second that motion. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask the staff, though, would you entertain an expansion of that motion to say acquire any and all of the properties on this list with the provision of the CAP Services amount on the two that are listed? But I guess I'm still hopeful that there may be other avenues that you'll think of that'll come up after this meeting, and I want to give you maximum flexibility to take advantage of those if they arise. So would you suggest that as an expansion of it, or is
I
it?
have no problem, it's just the comfort level that you're given in terms of the dollar amount to acquire these properties.
Right, and I'm assuming that the opening would be, the minimum would be the back taxes. I don't know what a maximum would be. I don't know if you want us to put a maximum on there. Back taxes is going to be the minimum bid, though, I'm sure. But I want to give you, unless you just want to come back to us, if something arises and you want to come back to us and say, hey, I got this
I think
great
we can
idea.
strategize for the other, 1909 Prairie, 1100 Fourth, I don't, the county didn't take that, so it's not like it's an active sale, and if we have the structure raised, it takes care of the issue.
Right, exactly.
That one's probably not worth saving anyway, but the other wild card is just 1700 Strongs, and, how we would acquire that structure as well as the parking lot, because if you acquire the church and not the parking lot, it becomes really problematic.
Yeah.
But what we could do is come back for the other one or two properties.
Okay.
I think we have time to.
Yeah, I second the motion as is.
Yeah, if something comes up, we can meet relatively quick,
Okay.
I would think. Any other comments, questions? You want a roll call?
Yeah, Schleiss,
Aye.
Phillips,
Aye.
Gardner,
Aye.
Kemeter.
Aye.
Motion passes. That covers 8 and 7?
Let's do a separate vote on 8.
Okay. Motion on 8 separately?
Mr. Chairman, I would move that we develop an agreement with CAP Services for the sale and transfer of 1525 Ellis Street and 1708 Elk Street.
We have a motion to develop agreement. Commissioner Phillips, second.
And that would be authorization for myself and the
Yes.
chairperson.
Authorization for the chairperson and staff to enter into that agreement and execute it.
Any questions? Roll.
Schleiss,
Aye.
Phillips, Gardner,
Aye.
Kemeter.
Aye.
Motion passes. Number 9, acknowledgement of Plan Commission's recommendation on May 6th related to the request from the Redevelopment Authority of the City of Stevens Point for easements to Wisconsin Public Service for the purpose of constructing utilities at the following properties: 1017 3rd Street, Center Point Drive, 3rd Street, and 3 3rd Streets. So 3 thirds, that must be a 1. Director.
So items 9, 10, and 11 kind of go together. Item 9 is just acknowledging the Plan Commission's recommendation because we're giving up an interest in this property. Item number 10 is the specific easement agreements, and then item number 11 is raising of the structure to install the utilities. So kind of here's the situation that we're working with. The Lullaby project continues to proceed. They're working with WPS to relocate and bury the power lines. We're working on the transfer of the property as we speak as well. But in order for them to bury the power lines on Lullaby, they also have to relocate them on the Belkey block. We're not that far along with Wanta yet where, we can just say, go to the Wanta people and allow them to sign the easements. So what we're looking at here is given the chairperson and executive director the authorization to enter into an easement agreement with WPS for the installation of these utilities in the areas that are outlined within the agenda packet unless they change because of the development. This allows the Lullaby project to keep moving. If we are able to transfer the property to the developer, we would just transfer that easement agreement if we've already signed it, or they would just execute a new easement agreement with WPS, or their name is on that easement agreement. This is really just an efficiency standpoint to get the easements in place so they can move forward with the Lullaby project. If you look on the page number 4 within my staff report, you'll see the hashed area. That's the Belkey block. We're still working with them on trying to get them out of private property on the south and east sides of the property and get them in the right-of-way. WPS really tries to get easements as opposed to being in the right-of-way. This way they don't have to move if there's road construction, but we're trying to push them in the right-of-way for those. But you'll see that easement that kind of goes midway between this. That is the area where the access drive would be for the Wanta development. So this would go down that back access drive and kind of out of the way of the developments. That would be a good place. I have spoken with Wantas. They are agreeable to this, so I don't see any concerns with this, but it's more of an efficiency standpoint so we can keep the Lullaby project moving forward so they can relocate those lines because they can't start any construction until those lines are moved on the southern end of the property. Since this is a main line, it's a lot more complicated where they'll be burying the lines essentially from Pioneer Park Place, which is on the west side of First Street, all the way back to almost Farm Shed, just east of Union. So it's a pretty sizable project that's going to be undertaken, but it should clean up the downtown area quite nicely.
Okay, first we need to have a motion on the acknowledgement of the Plan Commission, and we'll move to number 10.
I'll move that we acknowledge the action of the Plan Commission.
Commissioner Demeter, second by Commissioner Phillips. Any other discussion? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Number 10, easement agreements with Wisconsin Public Services for the property we just discussed.
So these would just be standard easement agreements that, we've done on the city side with WPS for the installation of utilities. Just authorizing the chairperson and executive director to do that for those specific areas unless they change slightly due to the developments.
I just have a question. The WPS letter said that, that this estimated cost is effective for 60 days and it was given in November. Does that price still hold through?
So the cost is being borne by the developer of the Lullaby lot.
Okay.
So they'll be, the contract for the installation of these utilities will be with that developer.
Okay.
As you indicated, the easement goes right through the middle of that former Belkey property. And I see that it's picking it up on Third Street and then going south down to Center Point Drive. My suspicion is you've already explored the idea of running it on the south side of the parking lot or through our parking lot so it didn't subdivide that Belkey property right down the middle.
Yeah, the issue you run into, so here's kind of what you're talking about on the screen. This is down that center drive aisle that will be right behind the 10 live-work units down that access drive. We have looked at exploring trying to run it potentially down the middle of the parking lot. The challenge there is we've got the 84-inch storm sewer that gets in the way. But that would be ideal to run it out of there because then it would be out of the way of everything. But Wantas were okay with running it down there because then they can take service. As you see kind of in this upper corner here, they can take service to their development, which would be just right in this location. And then since it goes down the middle, it would also serve Phase 2 and Phase 3 to the north.
Further questions?
Motion to approve the easements as outlined by staff.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Commissioner Demeter, any other discussion? Roll.
Schleiss.
Aye.
Phillips. Barrett.
Aye.
Gardner.
Aye.
Kemeter.
Aye.
Motion carries. Number 11, raising the building located on Third Street, the former Belkey property. Director.
So this deals with, so in order for WPS to install these lines, this access drive and where they would run these utilities is right under where that large metal shed is for the property. So let me pull that up real quick here. this metal shed.
So you missed the building, huh?
We,
I thought that,
we missed
the
the building.
retail sales.
It's, yeah, so it would run essentially right down the center of the building. You can see the overhead lines that are there now. Those would be shifted to the north a little bit and running straight down. So in order for them to install these utilities, the building needs to be out of the way. And since we have not formalized the development agreement with Wanta, we need to likely remove this building in order to get this project on Lullaby completed. I have spoken with Wantas, so either, I can see a couple courses of action here. One, because they were going to cover the cost of the demolition of the structures. That one, if we do it, then we would just add that onto the purchase price. Or if Wantas are comfortable proceeding with the cost to demo these buildings without an development agreement in place, that we would allow them to do that. So those would be the two options that we could consider, but ultimately, the building needs to get out of the way, at least the main structure building. The house is getting pretty close to one of those easement areas, but it looks like we can at least work within the existing footprint here to address kind of the project at hand. But with this one, I'd just be looking for authorization to allow either the chairperson and myself to enter into a contract with the demolition company, or to work with Wantas to raise the building. The quote that I know Wantas received originally when they looked at this project was $20,000 to raise that building, so we should be under the bidding threshold of $25,000. So what we would do is look at two quotes and then go with the lowest quote if we're going to raise it. If Wanta wants to raise it, then they can use the contractor they so choose.
What are your
Historic did grant approval to raise all the structures on the property.
I'll move to raise the buildings.
Commissioner Phillips?
Is that one building or two buildings?
It's one building. I think we're going to be able to skirt the house a little bit until phase 2 comes into place. So this is the main building that we need to get out of the way at this point in time. I think we probably will want to at least try to work with Wantas here to get the other house raised. Apparently we did have a break-in at the house as well.
I'll second that.
And a second. I'm not contagious, it's allergies. Any other discussion? Roll.
Schleiss.
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Barrett.
Aye.
Gardner.
Aye.
Kemmerer.
Aye.
Motion carries. Number 12, targeted master area plans.
So we did have our targeted area master plans. We had our kickoff meeting in January, and then we had a follow-up presentation with Vanderwall here on April 25th. It was more of an open house session at the Park and Rec building where they started presenting some of the preliminary results of the initial input meeting and other fact-finding that they've done. I did hand out also on the table today, this is, they were able to also put together the responses to some of the questions that they had asked at the meeting, so this document is for your review as well. All this information is on our website. But going through here, I'd be happy to kind of walk through the plans and some of the initial recommendations that they've considered. Let's see here. And if you have any questions, feel free to stop me. These plans are within your packet, but essentially what they see, this is only on Division Street. The downtown initial concepts will be presented at a meeting coming up here the 23rd of May. So what they see on Division Street really is three separate kind of distinct areas. One is this community gateway district, which essentially is Maria Drive north to the city limits, just by Century there. Then moving south, this North Division Street district, kind of more of this campus, bringing buildings closer to the street, more urbanized, pedestrian-friendly movement between Maria Drive and then 4th Avenue. And then 4th Avenue South, really kind of transforming into more of a campus gateway. You know, as we looked at this, University doesn't really have an entrance out on Division Street. You know, you come from down Main Street, you start getting next to Old Main. It feels like Old Main is part of the neighborhood. It blends in well, mature trees. You know, you start coming down Stanley, you get where the new science building is. It starts entering a nice entrance into the university. You come down Division Street, you can go right past the university pretty much without seeing it. So they really wanted to focus on exploring opportunities to expose the 4th Avenue intersection as being this campus corridor, making it feel like campus is integrated within the community along the Division Street corridor. Some of the differences that, you know, they see with this planning effort, as you go north of Maria, the right-of-way gets significantly wider than the rest of the stretch as you head south. So there's a lot more room to play with. However, you know, this is an area where, you know, buildings are fairly set back off of the street. There's a frontage road, so you're not going to see a significant change to urbanize this stretch anytime soon. A lot of the buildings are actually much newer within that area with Century, and, you know, there's 2 new buildings being built, the Burger King and Taco John. So you're not going to have a significant impact of bringing those buildings right up to the street anytime in the near future. So they see this more as that entry corridor. As you then start moving to the south, again, between Maria and 4th, starting to urbanize this area a little bit more, maybe some mixed-use buildings, adding in some housing opportunities, slowing traffic down, and really creating more of a pedestrian corridor, especially connecting back to the university along 4th Avenue. And then again, as you hit 4th and south, that right-of-way continues to narrow where it gets really challenging to have the needed right-of-way to install any of the necessary improvements within the right-of-way that we want to see. So as they've gone through this from a street standpoint, you start with the roundabout, 4 lanes, you know, heading all the way pretty much down to 4th Avenue, and then it transitioning into a 3-lane, essentially 2 lanes with a twiddle in the middle. Feeling that the traffic counts, and we'll get information on traffic counts both past and projected, but really the traffic counts don't warrant it anymore, and it really isn't probably in the best interest to acquire right-of-way to continue a 4-way all the way through there, you know, similar to what maybe Whiting or Plover did. Kind of really decimated that corridor from a development standpoint. As you go through, it's a wide stretch of roadway, you know, and this goes through kind of the heart of the city, a historic neighborhood, wanting to preserve that. So what this would help do is convert the 4 lanes down to a 3, but also there isn't a lot of right-of-way to add bike lanes, so that they would recommend putting bike lanes on the parallel routes on the alternative streets, just maybe 1 block off, and then utilizing that additional space that is gained to put towards the boulevards. Because right now that sidewalk is butted right up against the curb, challenges for snow plowing. It's not really a friendly place to walk. It doesn't feel safe. Plus, by adding a boulevard area, you're able to add trees, and then the aesthetics improve within the neighborhood. So that's kind of that transition that they see going through with this corridor. Some of the key redevelopment area sites are shown within the packet as well, circled in red. You know, one of the large ones being the area north of the proposed Kmart, or the former Kmart site. Just really an underutilized area, and as we work with the developer on the Kmart site to transition that to a student housing and commercial center, this provides a nice opportunity for some larger tracts of land to potentially look at redevelopment opportunities with, and then just some spattering of other potential sites along that stretch. Also within your packet, this gives you kind of the roadway and the visuals and kind of what it would look like. This is what they see as, you know, the existing Division Street, and then the improvements, obviously adding more public art, trees, landscaping, signage, banners, and so forth to really kind of dress up that corridor and really make it an entry into our community. And you know, oftentimes we see, you know, students or business owners or people visiting our community, this is the first impression that they get in our community, is coming down the stretch of Division. And right now it looks like a very tired commercial corridor, and it doesn't provide a very good first impression. So making the necessary public improvements to spur additional private investment is going to be key as we go through this process to make it look like a very inviting corridor that people want to be a part of.
Mike, how long does that TIF up there run yet?
So the TIF expires in 2034 is the last revenue year. So we've got, a few years left on the TIF, so getting the investment in there now to help facilitate the reconstruction of Business 51 is going to be important. We've got a lot of good projects going on in that corridor, but that would be, hopefully the intention that as we gain that increment, we can use that increment to use for the reconstruction.
Other questions?
Is
Comments,
there
John?
a limit?
Do you have something?
Yeah, is there a limit to when you can do public improvements on that TIF?
Yeah, so your last, the expenditure period ends 5 years before the district closes. So if it's 2034, 2033, or 2028, 2029, we've got about, 10 years or so left.
All right. The other comment I would make is that south of Fourth, they've got the district outlined on the west side of Division Street between, between Franklin and Fourth. I'd like you to ask the consultant's opinion about expanding that study area to be equal to Vincent Court. And the reason I do that is because they're pretty shallow lots. And the chances of redeveloping those homes, those structures on the west side of Division Street makes it more difficult if they're shallow, whereas if they expanded it out to Vincent Court, there may be a better chance of some redevelopment there. And I might even add the same comment at the intersection of College and Division. And on the east side of Division Street between College and Portage, same comment. So maybe, I'd be interested in their opinion,
Okay.
as whether an expansion of that boundary and that redevelopment boundary would have some advantages.
Other questions, comments? I'm old enough to remember when we expanded Division Street and the traffic then, so I asked, believe it or not, that's a long time ago.
Has the traffic really
Well, the question
gone
I've
down on
asked,
Division Street since Century opened the new?
that's what I've asked the director to do, is get us a
Yeah.
traffic counts for 10-year increments for the last 50 years, plus what the projections are from the superhighway to the south. I have a concern when you have a superhighway coming in and we're gonna go, where are we gonna move that traffic to, and are we gonna cause redevelopment problems in another area of the city? I think if we can understand the traffic counts, it may help us analyze what we're looking at here. But without those, on paper, to me, it doesn't look like it's workable for the overall impact of that traffic. It's nice, it's pretty, but is it practical?
And I can get the traffic counts, and once I have those, I'll send them out to there.
And then we'll be getting copies of drafts and everything on the studies here.
So downtown should be completed shortly, and then I'll send those out. Again, that meeting will be on the 23rd, public meeting at Midstate.
Okay. But as far as meetings, we really shouldn't be attending those public meetings, should we? According to some articles from a city attorney and a few other people.
If we notice it as a meeting, but then we need to have a quorum. The other thought too is that, this one serves really as a public input session with an open house. So you have, your brief presentation at the beginning, and then you have several different stations where comments are being made.
So is the recommendation that we do not attend and get the information later, rather than,
I'd recommend that, yeah.
that would be my recommendation, I guess, is,
Yes.
because we'll have our time to debate.
Well, I feel like I was just here at this podium talking about this. My recommendation is what Michael said, which is if this group would want to attend that, we can modify things and make it so that you're able to. However, I think the sort of biggest hurdle there is with regards to the format. I think that like Michael said, the sort of open house type format doesn't really lend itself very easily to being a proper meeting of a government body. You have a million different individual conversations going on. Nobody is really keeping a record of anything that's being said. And there's not just the possibility, but sort of the intent that those conversations will go off topic and veer into the weeds, and that you'll get all sorts of diverse information and feedback from members of the public. So that type of information gathering has a lot of value in terms of planning, but just doesn't really lend itself to following the rules for open meetings.
I think we'll get copies of the comments and everything else, so we'll have plenty of ample time in the future to debate this.
Well, John Gardner could
Unless there's
go.
some,
John Gardner could go. You could send him as a delegate to it.
Right, there's certainly no problem with 2 members attending.
But that's it.
alrighty.
Is it the total 7? Oh, okay, then 3. All right.
All right, thank you, Logan. Number 13, Environmental Protection Agency County Community-Wide Brownfield Assessment Grant Activity.
As I mentioned, this is just going to be a standard item on here since the RA serves as the kind of Brownfields Oversee Committee for our grant. We've done a little bit more activity, finalizing some testing that was done around the Belkey property and Eagle Plumbing and Jerry's Auto, Moses Creek. We did look at some environmental testing in there to kind of see what we're dealing with. When we did Belkey's, we had some elevated levels of metals within the soil, but nothing too significant within that area. Also did a phase 1 of the old Tony's landscaping out by Mason Street site, did indicate some stuff, and I know the potential purchaser of that property did proceed with another firm to do a phase 2 on there, but I haven't heard back anything regarding any significance findings out by the landfill. But that's it at this point in time. As we start looking at some of these larger redevelopment properties, the grant will come in handy for those along Division Street as well as the downtown area. So we don't want to deplete our funds too quickly. We have 3 years on this grant. It's $300,000, $150 for petroleum, $150 for hazardous substance. So we've spent a good amount already with some of the properties that we looked at downtown with, like I said, the Belkey block. We looked at Soik Plumbing and several others. So we've spent a good amount already. So I think as we start heading with some of these other projects, we probably want to reserve some of those funds for those projects.
Didn't we have all those environmental studies and all that when Tony's was gonna sell it the last time, whatever that was, 10, 15 years ago?
Yeah, there were studies, but it didn't seem like they were complete. That presented a challenge, and the documentation for everything was not there.
Okay, because I know they were close to selling it one time.
Yeah.
Alrighty, moving right on, Director's Update.
Nothing further?
Moving farther along. Number 15, enter into closed session pursuant to Wisconsin statutes 19.85, paren E, for the delivering or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session relating to the following. A, negotiating the terms of a possible development agreement relating to the properties located at Center Point Drive, 3rd Street, and the Belkey Block. We have a motion
To go into closed session?
Commissioner Phillips,
Second?
Commissioner Caviter. Roll.
Schleiss?
Aye.
Phillips?
Aye.
Barrett?
Aye.
Gardner?
Aye.
Cameter?
Aye.
We are in closed session.
Videos of these meetings are available from